Welcome to Theory Underground. It's Dave and Nance. How's it going, everybody?
How's it going, everybody? Hey.
We're going to be doing Niklas Luhmann's social systems theory. Is that right?
Social systems.
Social systems.
Here we'll go.
Yeah, you're supposed to have the book. Where's the cover? So
it's up here.
We're
this PDF sucks. So
this is something we've been looking forward to doing for a little while now. We're really excited to be doing it with you all. And so basically, Social Systems by Niklas Luhmann is the work for getting into his thought. Like, this is sort of his magnum opus. And he's the father of social systems theory. And so Nance has sold me on the idea that this guy is worth it, but I want to let you say a couple things, for 30 seconds before we get going about the why you want to do this, or why you think a person might want to check it out, starting with this video, starting with this chapter we're going to dive into.
So Luhmann has written some other books before this one. Like, this really is the consummation and his magnum opus. And it's like the skeleton key that kind of unlocks his more sociological works, I guess. Like, he wrote Politics and Law, which are really interesting. But this book is where the fucking rubber hits the road. And it's super relevant to CMT because it's constructivism, and he's basically drawing out what the fuck that even means. And before we even get to the point where we're forming opinions and developing behaviors on this level of sociology, this is like the mechanics of what's happening in our body, what's happening in our brain. It's very much like a structural look at all these systems that comprise what we take for granted when we deal with humans and human behavior. It's really unconventional, but it's also, I like constructivism, not social constructivism. They're different fucking things. And it just, like, over the last few months, I've been reading more and more, but before that, like, I was like, oh, this is where it's at. But even more so now with critical media theory, it's just like, dude, this peanut butter is already in this chocolate. Like, it's not an issue of like, oh, we're doing something unconventional. It's like, no, this is included in the conversation we're having. We're just not aware of it.
Nice.
And Luhmann is doing like this. This is why you're not aware of it, because all this shit is going on in the background. And I love it. It's great. I'm excited to do it and actually engage with it rigorously, rather than kind of sit back and read it and like chew my tongue, as that one guy said, as Michael Easter called himself a tongue chewing alcoholic or whatever. Like, yeah, dude. I'm not just passively breathing through my mouth while reading this. Like, actually getting in there and getting my hands dirty. So I'm stoked.
Yeah, man. That's perfect. Yeah. And McLuhan and Baudrillard and Marx, everyone already knows we're going to be using them for CMT. Most people probably have some idea, if they've gone through the lectures at this point, that Arendt and Heidegger are big as well. But there's these other ones, Virilio, Ellul, Stiegler, and Luhmann, who've been on my horizon. They've been on my radar now for months. Well, okay, some of them for like a decade, but Luhmann for months and Virilio for like a decade. And so we dived into Virilio. We read the entire reader that Steve Red had put together, so that was fantastic. And now we're doing it with Luhmann, followed by Ellul, followed by Stiegler. And we're doing this with each one of them because they are these secondary people who never come up first. And so the idea was, with a book like Being in Time, like when you're doing an exegetical, you're supposed to read it before getting on a video call and reading it. But like we wanted to break out of that and just dive straight in to something we've never done before. So that's what we did with Virilio. That's what we did. So this is like a first time react, except that this one, Nance has covered a lot more of the territory. I've listened to a few chapters, and I didn't get very much from listening to it. I'm hoping this will open something. Yeah, this is the great opening. I'm hoping this will be more accessible this time around because I'll have eyes on screen half the time. We'll be talking about it half the time, not half the time, 30% of the time. And I'm going to have Nance take it away here in a second. I'm going to go get some food while he reads the first bit of it. But before we do that, though, I wanted you to explain why we're starting with chapter 3.
So we are starting with chapter 3 instead of going in from the beginning for multiple reasons. If you read the introduction to this book, it kind of does a little bit of an explanation where in social systems, everything is like not discrete, but everything is disparate. Everything is, everything is like a discrete member of a larger system. And then that system operates as a holistic whole, but everything is kind of a system unto itself. And the way this book is written, it's very much dealing with each chapter is a chapter in itself in a kind of way. And so in the introduction, it's very clear about the fact that this book is not necessarily to be read in a linear fashion. There's not a directionality in this book. It takes very broad strides.
No, that's how it is in Thousand Plateaus as well. But in that one, you're still supposed to read the introduction and the conclusion, but the plateaus you can read in any order. Is that right? I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one, it's just it does. You don't even have to read the introduction.
Yeah, and I feel like I don't know. D&G are probably doing a little more performativity than Luhmann was doing. Like Luhmann wasn't. I don't think he was intending to set something out that was rhizomatic. It just so happened to be that the way he systematizes things, like he really does, things are smaller bits that constitute a larger holistic whole or system, as he calls everything is a system. And so there's systems and there's environments. So I think this nonlinearity emerged from his system itself, rather than D&G were, trying to perform a rhizome. So it's not edgy and it's not cool to start wherever you feel like. We're starting with chapter 3 because it's interesting. Dave and I have kind of been talking about stuff that has come up from it. And I actually do think this is where I got my Levinas insight, was while I was reading chapter 3 a few weeks ago. Just the other day when Dave was lecturing on Levinas, I had a little light bulb came on in my head, and I'm pretty sure it was dealing with part of this chapter 3 itself. So chapter 3 is where it's at.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm always, one of the most interesting things for me is always the theory of the subject. And so if this is where his theory of the subject is, then that's a great place for me to start, especially because I've been thinking a lot about how the Lacanian unconscious can be interpreted as basically the Heideggerianized unconscious, which is to say it's a referential totality of equipment and signification, not just in a referential context, but also in a context of assignments, and that those assignments have goals, and that there's ultimate for the sakes of which is for those goals, like ultimate goals, or ultimate aims. And then a lot of those, there are primordial ones, like, which is to say like original ones that like give rise to the actual system or field. And that, but that it forms a kind of unconscious, like you have a kind of unconscious of like the actual ecology around you. If you're in nature, then you have a sort of unconscious of like the city, town, whatever you live in, the house, right? And it's like, I was thinking like, how do you, so like, if because the unconscious is outside of you, it's like this extimate thing, right? Like language is outside of you as well. And thinking about it, that like, I was like, well, there's not just referential totalities of equipment and signification. In the world, though, there are institutions, and those institutions are things that Foucault analyzed. And so I started thinking about like the unconscious and its relation to the world that is structured by institutions. And these are obviously structured by and for power. And so like I started thinking about like Marx, Foucault, and then like, but like humans, like we want to exist outside of institutions. We want to be able to also just like have good lives that aren't reducible to systems, but systems want to reduce us to them. But then again, maybe we just want to get away from them because we're sick of them, but we are also products of them. We wouldn't even know what we're doing without them. We wouldn't have this idea of freedom from institutions if it wasn't for institutions in the first place, because we would have never developed consciousness to the degree that we have without institutions. And so it's like thinking through all of that, like this Lacanian, Heideggerian, Foucauldian, like kind of thing. And I was also thinking about how Levinas would factor into it, how Arendt would factor into it. I'm really excited because I think Luhmann will be helpful towards all of that. Cool, man. How about you take it away? I'm going to go eat some food real quick.
Word. So this is chapter 3, entitled Double Contingency, section 1. The concept that is the theme of this chapter leads directly into the theory of social systems. It is prominently positioned in the general statement of the anthology Toward a General Theory of Action, a work that sought programmatically to introduce the development of a general theory into the social sciences. Hitherto, the concept and its underlying constellation of problems have not received the attention that they deserve, as is no less true of Parsons' own use of this concept in his later works. Therefore, we must study this account of the concept carefully to ascertain its relation to the theoretical constellations we have discussed so far, and we will see them all reappear: system, complexity, self-reference, and meaning. Parsons begins with the fact that action cannot take place if Alter makes his action dependent on how ego acts, and ego wants to connect his action to Alter's. A pure circle of self-referential determination, lacking any further elaboration, leaves action indeterminate, makes it indeterminable. This is not a matter of mere behavioral agreement, nor of coordinating the interests and intentions of different actors. Instead, it concerns a basic condition of possibility for social action as such. No action can occur without first solving this problem of double contingency, because any possibility of determination would then be lacking. Therefore, Parsons includes solving the problem of double contingency within the concept of action, indeed, in such a way that he makes a normative orientation with the assumption of consensus an indispensable feature of action. This forms the basis of his four-function schema. The theoretical advances here should not be lightly dismissed. It is important to emphasize that Parsons clearly goes beyond theories of mere conformity and coordination. We would emphasize that the problem of double contingency belongs to the conditions of possibility for action, and that therefore the elements of action systems, namely actions, can be constituted only in these systems and only by solving the problem of double contingency. This is why it is even more important to make the move from the problem of double contingencies to ideas about its solution with care. And this is where we diverge from Parsons. As we have intimated, Parsons saw the solution in an assumed, but backed up by sufficient reality, value consensus in a harmonious normative orientation in a shared symbolic system which possesses normative character like a code. Seen within the history of theory, this proposal was formulated in a period of transition. Like the sociology of the first half of this century, it presupposes that all societies hand down culture and that every social situation always uncovers culture. The long-term structures that regenerate social order lie in this cultural inheritance and thus in the past. Accordingly, the problem of social order is not so much a problem of political domination as a problem of socialization. The concept of interpretation, as Parsons uses it, formulates this, but that only displaces into the past the posing of the problem. Then one can always understand socio-cultural evolution as deviant socialization. But in principle, the constitution of social systems is bound to a cultural code that is always already to hand, although the emergence and function of this code must be explained. Yet, by its imminent circularity, the formation of double contingency points beyond this traditional theoretical approach and promises something new. Nothing forces one to seek the solution for the problem of double contingency exclusively in an already existing consensus.
All right.
Thus, in the social dimension. Yep.
So what's going on with double contingency? How is it factoring in here? I'm not sure how I'm following along with this idea. And it's something that Parsons figured out. Is that right?
No, he's saying I go beyond Parsons. To posit constructivism, basically. Like he's saying like Parsons is naturalizing things, and Luhmann is like, well, let's not naturalize, like let's go back to the initial input or whatever of this, whatever it is, phenomenon in society or in culture, and let's see where that comes from. Oh, turns out that was also contingent on something that was always already contingent. So double contingency is constructivism, like it is constructed.
Double contingency just means it's not just contingent, it's contingent, and also it's the situation it's occurring in is contingent. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know if I would say that. Like
All
it's, I mean, yeah, that is the case, because something comes from a situation, and instead of just saying, oh, the situation caused this, it is kind of saying, oh, well, that situation was already downstream of something else.
So it looks like double contingency is speaking of, it's that ego and alter ego both know that one could act differently, could also act differently.
Exactly. So that's where, like, that's where I went with the dark forest thing I was talking about with Levinas. Like we are.
So it creates it creates an infinity problem. Okay.
Yes, an infinite regress.
Okay. I gotta run and stop this food from burning. I'll be right back.
Cool. Okay. but that only displaces into the past the posing of the problem. I don't remember where the hell we were. Yet, by its imminent circularity, the formulation of double contingency points beyond this traditional theoretical approach and promises something new. Nothing forces one to seek the solution for the problem of double contingency exclusively in an already existing consensus, thus in the social dimension. There are functional equivalents, for example, those in the temporal dimension. At first, Alter tentatively determines his behavior in a situation that is still unclear. He begins with a friendly glance, a gesture, a gift, and waits to see whether and how ego receives the proposed definition of the situation. In light of this beginning, every subsequent step is an action with a contingency-reducing, determining effect, be it positive or negative. We will return to this later. When one thus broadens the framework of possible solutions to the problem Parsons' theory proposes, one at once opens the theory more powerfully to chance. We can connect this with the order from noise principle of general systems theory. No preordained value consensus is needed. The problem of double contingency, i.e. empty, closed, indeterminable self-reference, draws in chance straight away, creates sensitivity to chance, and when no value consensus exists, one can thereby invent it. The system emerges et si no deritur Deus, even if God doesn't exist. This reorientation requires further corrections to Parsons' initial theoretical formulations. Parsons had in mind, in a fairly rough sense, subjects of action who confront one another with self-determined, not just naturally given needs, and who depend on one another for the satisfaction of their needs. But this account of the problem leaves its flank open to attack. One would have to ask what these subjects of action, actors, agents, designated as ego and alter, really are if what constitutes their organism, later behavioral system, and personality is differentiated only within the action system and is not given in advance to the system. And one would have to ask how contingency is to be understood if all determinate order emerges only within the problematic of double contingency. To facilitate an answer, we first shift the level on which the problem of double contingency is posed to the more general theoretical one on which meaning is constituted and continually processed. As intimated in the preceding chapter, one can speak of ego and alter in regard to an open potential for meaning determination that is given in the form of horizons to those who experience this potential in themselves or in others. Let's read that sentence again. As intimated in the preceding chapter, one can speak of ego and alter in regard to an open potential for meaning determination that is given in the form of horizons to those who experience this potential in themselves or in others. So ego and alter are basically self and other, but also a constellation of potentialities of interpretation. Which is why, like, this infinite regress occurs, because one can never be sure, right? But also, we find things upon which we can agree to either disagree or not give a shit too much, because we don't need this acute detail. We can tell the analytic bros to just roll with the punches, because we actually have some serious shit to get down to. In themselves or in others. The problem of double contingency is virtually always present whenever a meaning experiencing psychic system is given. It accompanies all experiencing in an unfocused way up to the point when experience encounters another person or social system to which free choice is attributed. Then it becomes relevant as the problem of behavioral agreement. This problem becomes topical for concrete, that is, real, psychic and social systems, or for traces, writings, that such systems have left behind. For double contingency to become acute, the mere fact of the encounter is not enough. Double contingency emerges as a motivating problem, and therefore as motivating the constitution of social systems, only when these systems are experienced and treated in a specific way, namely as an endlessly open possibility of meaning determination that eludes access from the outside. Hence the special terminology of ego and alter, or alter ego. The concepts of ego and alter should leave open whether they concern psychic or social systems, and they should leave open whether or not these systems adopt a determinate processing of meaning. Again, Mikey does this. When I say gobbledygook or whatever the fuck, zoogiloo, I can never know what he means by zoogiloo, so I rely on context. And it is the same thing when Mikey says tree. I have no access to specifically what Mikey means when he says tree. It's impossible for me to know what Mikey says at an atomic level of detail when he says tree, but there are social institutions and social conventions and norms, and there are all these things that allow us to agree that we can develop a rough approximation. And if we are so motivated to cooperate, then we'll settle for that rough approximation. And everything works that way. And I don't know if that little interjection was clarifying for anybody, but that's how I like to think about it. Accordingly, we must broaden the concept of contingency. That is, trace it back to its original interpretation in modal theory. This concept results from excluding necessity and impossibility. Something is contingent insofar as it is neither necessary nor impossible. It is just what it is, or was, or will be, though it could also be otherwise. The concept thus describes something given, something experienced, expected, remembered, fantasized, in the light of its possibly being otherwise. It describes objects within the horizon of possible variations. It presupposes the world as it is given, yet it does not describe the possible in general, but what is otherwise possible from the viewpoint of reality. In this sense, recently it has become customary to speak of the possible worlds of one real life world. The reality of this world is presupposed by the concept of contingency as its first and irreplaceable condition of possibility. This modified, non-Parsonian understanding of double contingency has a twofold consequence. It enables the differentiation of a particular world dimension or socially distinct meaning perspectives, the social dimension, and it enables the differentiation of particular action systems, namely social systems. The social is then accessible in all meaning as the problem of the similarity or discrepancy of interpretive perspectives. It is simultaneously a specific occasion for selectively coordinating actions within systems that can distinguish themselves from their environment. By modifying Parsons' theoretical approach, phenomenology and systems theory, the analysis of meaning and system environment analysis can be united. Of course, this still needs to be developed in a way that transcends the level of abstraction in Parsons' presentation. So that's the end of the first section. And I think I take this to be like, okay, in a sense, you'll never have access to absolute meaning. You'll never have access to the entirety of meaning when someone else uses a word. But that doesn't mean that that meaning doesn't exist, and that doesn't mean that rough approximations or even very acute approximations, just not exact approximations, that doesn't mean we can throw those out, because it is because of these approximations that anything works at all. So it's the groundless grounds things. It's like, okay, we could do the infinite regress, or we could just find like a functional floor and agree we don't really need to go down into the basement. Sure, it can be fun sometimes to go down into the basement and play Dungeons and Dragons and argue about what blah, 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 do the thing. Sure, that can be fun, but there is a floor. And on that floor, everything that we have and know and take for granted and love and cherish and appreciate and experience, all of that rests upon this floor. That's how I take it.
It's really good. The way in which double contingency has been formulated as a problem encourages one to imagine ego and alter on both sides as fully concrete human beings, subjects, individuals, or persons. Human beings, subjects, individuals, persons for him are all the same word. This is neither entirely false nor entirely true. The theorem of double contingency serves to dissolve such an excessively compact premise. Now, of course, this can occur only if a substitute can be found. We shift an essential part of this problematic to the chapter on interpenetration. For the moment, only a few clarifying remarks are needed, relating to the theoretical advantages to be gained by this process of dissolution. Above all, we must detach ourselves from the traditional manner of treatment that tried to solve the problem of double contingency, even when it did not call it that, with concepts like reciprocity, reflection, reciprocity and perspectives, or even reciprocity of performances. The unity being sought was seen as a kind of stapling together what was different. Similarly, sociality was conceived as relationships between individuals, and one was led to believe that individuals could not drop out of the picture without relationships also disappearing. This idea has slowly and almost unnoticeably become inadequate because of increasing emphasis on the selectivity of perspectives and the impossibility of ascertaining the other. In the end, every model of this kind, assuming symmetry, founders upon the problem of complexity and the necessarily selective reduction of complexity that is steered self-referentiality within the system. If one wants to talk about reflection, then to some degree he can include the fact that mirrors mirroring each other enlarge, shrink, or otherwise distort and bring a subjective component into play. But the metaphor becomes inadequate to the extent that self-referential selection increases, and it is above all inadequate when one considers that a distorting mirror does not grasp the distortion of the other mirrors. That is to say, when one takes the mirror metaphor to the level of the relationship between self-referentially operating systems, it dissolves, the mirrors break. But without this metaphor, one cannot think a reciprocity of perspectives, and thus the idea of reciprocally anticipating purposive reciprocity collapses. In short, how one can still conceive the unity of a relationship that joins together a multiplicity of self-referential systems becomes doubtful. The relationship itself becomes the reduction of complexity. This is, however, to say that it must be conceptualized as an emergent system. Symbolic interactionism is equally unsatisfactory, although for other reasons. This direction, in theory, builds a contingently acting alter ego into the ego and sees, quite correctly, the process of mediation as the use of symbols. But it treats the problem only on one side of the interaction, assuming that all is the same on the other. It treats, so to speak, only half of double contingency and thereby remains a theory of action. Social systems emerge, however, through and only through the fact that both partners experience double contingency and that the interminability of such a situation for both partners in any activity that then takes place possesses significance for the formation of structures. This cannot be grasped via the basic concept of action. A theory of social systems built upon the conceptual problem of double contingency can account for the differentiation of social and psychic systems more clearly. To be sure, situations with double contingency require a minimum of reciprocal observation and a minimum of expectation grounded in knowledge to initiate communication. At the same time, the complexity of such situations rules out the participants reciprocally fully understanding each other. Indeed, understanding every variant of system performance that each one individually contemplates. In the customary sociological terminology, one can express this by saying that the degree of reciprocal knowledge required to produce the social system is a variable that is actualized to a different degree from system to system. One can express it by saying that the degree of reciprocal knowledge required to reproduce the social system is for sure. One that varies with the type of social system and inasmuch depends on the variety of types that emerge in the course of sociocultural evolution. Thus, we must consider different forms and degrees of the personalization of social systems, or an analogous variable if ego and alter enact a social and not a psychic system. This means abandoning every substantialized interpretation of individuals and actors who, as the bearers of specific properties, make possible the formation of social systems. Instead, on the level of social systems, the question is posed: how much do the participants have to understand each other in order to communicate?
And this is why we need an intellectual milieu rather than just a scene.
Dude, a scene is just a bunch of people pointing at things. I mean, it's not even pointing. They're not even pointing. They're just standing around wearing t-shirts.
They're mirrors that are reflecting distorted reflections.
Yeah. We would like to call psychic systems that are observed by other psychic systems or by social systems persons. The concept of a personal system is thus one that involves an observer perspective, in which self-observation, so to speak, self-personalization, can be included. Because one can assume that any theory of psychic systems actualizes an observer perspective, one can speak of psychic and personal systems almost in the same sense. However, the conceptual distinction remains important because the concept of a person emphasizes relevance for an observer. We will not speak of the psychalization, but of the personalization of social systems in trying to express the dependence of communicational social systems' reproduction on the personal attributions of the participants. A further similarly technological problem is likewise difficult to solve with expressions comprehensible in everyday language. Here, too, great clarity and greater conceptual differentiation than sociologists usually expect are imperative to fruitful analysis. Highly complex meaning-using systems that are opaque and incalculable to one another are part of the infrastructures presupposed by the theorem of double contingency. These can be psychic or social systems. For the time being, we refrain from distinguishing between them and talk of them both as black boxes. So what's black boxes here? We're talking about highly complex meaning using systems are and the social systems. These or psychic and social systems. Is that what we're saying? Yes. Black boxes?
Yeah. So the highly complex meaning using systems that are opaque and incalculable to one another is the infrastructure presupposed by the theorem of double contingency. And that's just to say, like, we are these systems that are highly complex meaning using, and we are opaque and we are incalculable to one another. That is, yeah.
Each determines its own behavior by complex self-referential operations within its own boundaries. What can be seen of each is therefore necessarily a reduction. Each assumes the same about the other. Therefore, however many efforts they exert, and however much time they spend, they themselves are always faster, and the black boxes remain opaque to one another. Even if they operate in a strictly mechanical way, they must still suppose interminacy and determinability in relation to one another. Even if they themselves operate blindly, they proceed in relation to one another more effectively if they mutually assume determinability in their system-environment relationship and observe themselves through this. Any attempt to calculate the other will inevitably fail. One could be more successful and could gain experience by trying to influence the other from his environment. Incalculability is absorbed, one could almost say sublimated, by expressions of freedom. The
expressions of freedom.
The black boxes, so to speak, create whiteness when they come upon each other, or at least sufficient transparency for dealing with each other. Through their mere assuming, they create certainty about reality, because this assuming leads to assuming the alter ego's assuming. The assimilation of meaning material on the level of order presupposes two self-referential systems, reciprocally observing each other. We spoke above about mutualistic constitution. For the few aspects through which they deal with one another, their capacity for processing information can suffice. They remain separate. They do not merge. They do not understand each other any better than before. They concentrate on what they can observe as input and output in the other as a system in an environment, and learn self-referentiality in their own observer perspective. They can try to influence what they observe by their own action, and can learn further from the feedback. In this way, an emergent order can rise that is conditioned by the complexity of the systems that make it possible, but that does not depend on this complexities being calculated or controlled. We call this emergent order a social system. All right, continuing. For later discussions of structure, it is important to emphasize precisely which kind of constraint comes into play here and which kinds of uncertainty are eliminated or reduced. A social system is not built upon and does not rely on the ability of systems situated in double contingency to see through and prognosticate one another. The social system is a system because there is no basal certainty about states and no prediction of behavior to be built thereon. Only the uncertainties that result from this are controlled. They are controlled only with the reference to the participant's own behavior. System formation constraints, which in parentheses he says are structures. The possibilities of safeguarding one's own behavior in any such situation. System formation constraints. No, constrains. Okay. System formation constrains the structures, the possibilities of safeguarding one's own behavior in any such situation. Only thus can autopoietic reproduction, action out of action, emerge. The absorption of uncertainty runs its course by stabilizing expectations, not by stabilizing behavior, and this naturally presupposes that behavioral selections are not selected without orientation and expectations. In the context of double contingency, expectations thus acquire structural value for building emergent systems and a certain kind of reality, which in parentheses he says equals connective value. The same is true, and here it is entirely clear that we no longer formulate on a Parsonian basis for all semantic reductions with which participating systems create a transparency sufficient for reciprocal observation and communication. I have in mind concepts like person, intelligence, memory, and learning. Person indicates that one cannot observe how it comes about that expectations acquire probability by connection within a psychic realm, or formulated differently, for acquiring security via acquaintance. Intelligence indicates that one cannot observe how it comes about that a self-referential system in contact with itself chooses one and not another solution to a problem. Memory indicates that one cannot observe how one complex actual state of a system passes over into the next, so that one must fall back instead upon selected past inputs as indicators. That's a really, really good that's a really good definition of memory.
Yeah, I love this part, this paragraph where he gives his working definition of these things. Like I love it. It's fucking great. And of course it brackets out shit and it's instrumentalized for this specific system that he's developing. And I love it, dude. I fucking love Luhmann. The more and more I've been reading him, it's like, I love this writing. It's kind of like, what the fuck? But it's also like, okay, thank you for being so clear. Similarly, Heidegger, it's like, what the fuck is going on? But once you get in there a little bit, you're like, okay, I appreciate your care that you're taking and
right,
like anticipating the reader.
Yeah, exactly. Learning indicates that one cannot observe how information triggers far-reaching consequences by bringing about partial structural changes in a system without interrupting its self-identification. Learning indicates that one cannot observe how information triggers far-reaching consequences by bringing about partial structural changes in a system without interrupting its self-identification. Examples could be multiplied. Well, homie, give me some. They show that it would be futile to seek a psychic or even organic substrate for such things as person, intelligence, memory, or learning. All this concerns observer stratagems for interpreting what cannot be observed and transferring it to the emergent level of contact between systems. When that happens, and the one who is observed experiences it, then he may be prompted to orient his self-observation, which already confronts the same problem, accordingly, and after a while, if his experience is good, he will believe that he is a person who has intelligence and memory, is capable of learning, and so forth, and no one can contradict him, because no one can observe him more precisely than these concepts allow. Psychological considerations of this type belong to the emergent reality of social systems, thanks to autocatalysis by double contingency. This in no way implies that these concern an illusory world, fictions, or mere words, by contrast to the hard facts of the underlying system itself. In the relationship of emergence, there is not more or less reality, not diminishing reality, but rather variably selective connectivity. This is a matter of reestablishing transparency despite opaque complexity, and that can only be attained as new levels of system formation emerge. The relative transparency achieved in this way must, of course, be paid for. It is paid for with the experience of contingency, a wholesale concession that it could always have been otherwise compensates for the baselessness on which structure is acquired. Yeah, that's a banger ass quote right there. A wholesale, because that is the human experience, is like knowing that things could be otherwise. That's a crazy experience, and it's probably a uniquely human experience.
So far as we know or can know, absolutely. But again, with Luhmann, we're systems, we're not humans. And like, I think that goes a long way to I don't know, getting outside of the naturalization that is very common when you start to talk about human versus non-human. And I like it a lot. Because it's not about form, it's about content.
Experiences of contingency are a symptom of systems. Knowing and calculating the behavior of one's partner is replaced, because it is unattainable, by a concession of freedom, and one can then limit oneself to knowledge that contributes to handling contingency. This reduction is, and this is a theoretically central hypothesis of higher integrative power, bound to the experience of action and thereby steered by the concession of freedom. The meaning unit action is constituted as a synthesis of reduction and an opening for possibilities of selection. Its function is to secure this and reproduce it connectively. This is why what happens when black boxes deal with each other appears to them as action. Action is selection attributed to the system. Ooh. However, it may be rationalized as choice among alternatives, represented as decision, or related to motives. Initially, it is nothing more than actualized contingency and, seen from an observer's viewpoint, expectation that has been planted within what is incalculable. We will return to this in more detail in Chapter 4. An important consequence concerns the question under which difference does a system built on double contingency first start up. It is in the context of modern individualism and action theory, one is tempted to begin with the actor's own advantage or his, however subjectively, irrationally, thoughtlessly, and mistakenly set goals. But the theorem of double contingency leads to a different result. The system is first set in motion and orients itself by the question, will the partner accept or reject a communication? Or, in terms of action, will an action help or harm him? The position of self-interest arises only secondarily from the way in which the partner reacts to a proposal of meaning. The pursuit of one's own advantage is much too demanding an attitude to be a general presupposition, and the corresponding theories are developed very late. By contrast, no social system could get going if whoever initiates communication cannot know or would not be interested in knowing whether his partner reacted positively or negatively to his communication. A situation that would be entirely indeterminate in this regard, if all contact was not broken off immediately, would trigger efforts to clarify the presuppositions for the difference related to the partner. Finally, we must consider that the experience of contingency generated in this way is all-pervasive. It cannot be pinned down to intersystem relations and restricted to the emerging social action system, because the black boxes reciprocally experience and deal with themselves as systems with environments. Each side can distinguish between its environment, or the world as such, and the systems with environments in its environment. Thereby, experience related to the environment in addition to action becomes relevant, because one can act with regard to another only if one knows how one is oneself experienced in the other's environment by the other. The generalized result of constant operation under the condition of double contingency is finally the social dimension of all meaning, namely, that one can ask for any meaning how it is experienced and processed by others. This complicated structure of opaque systems oriented to an environment containing systems oriented to an environment forces one to distinguish the system-environment difference constitutive of any system from relations among specific systems. This is the background of retention against which one can see the evolution of meaning and the evolution of the distinction between experience and attributable action. Every moment of meaning offers a point of mediation for various system-environment references, a possibility for ad hoc integration, so to speak. This consideration simultaneously clarifies the connection between the social dimension immanent in meaning and the formation of social systems. The social dimension of all meaning concerns the entire world, the entire extensiveness of one's own experience, and the estimated experience of others, beginning in the concrete here and now. This world-wideness correspondingly must be reduced to something cared about at the margins. By contrast, social systems are formed only where the actions of different psychic and social systems must be attuned to each other, because the selection of one action is a precondition for the other, or vice versa. The constitution of the social dimension is a necessary but not sufficient condition for the constitution of social systems, just as experience is a necessary but not sufficient condition for action. The social dimension makes visible the possibilities for the divergence of system perspectives contained in all meaning. What is jointly interpreted can mean something quite different for each participant. This divergence can then be used to form social systems. It can offer the occasion for that. It can more or less compel it. Demands for action reside in the variety of experience. Double contingency creates pressure to act, but at the same time, one can read from the difference between experience and action that differences in ways of seeing and in processing experience do not determine how we act. The formation of social systems still has a problem to solve. The problem established in all meaning construction of the double contingency of social action.
Yeah, man. Section 3.
I'm going to wash dishes downstairs while I listen. If you need me to take over, just let me know. I'll run back up.
Word. Before we pursue the problem of system constitutive double contingency any further, we should interject an epistemological reflection concerning the form this theory takes. The theory we are beginning to work out is not oriented to perfection or the lack thereof, but to a specifically scientific interest in the dissolution and recombination of experiential contents. It does not begin with the fact that the world is in order, but merely exhibits faults that one can correct with the help of science. It does not pursue a social problems approach with regard to threats to stability or to deviation, exponential developments, or criminality. That themes like this deserve examination is, of course, beyond dispute. But here they do not determine the theoretical approach or the formulation of the problem. What is at issue here is not an interest in recognizing and curing, nor an interest in preserving what has been in existence, but first and foremost, an analytic interest to break through the illusion of normality, to disregard experience and habit, and, in this sense, here not intended as that of transcendental theory, to effect a phenomenological reduction. The methodological recipe for this is to seek theories that can succeed in explaining the normal as improbable. From the functionalistic perspective, this can occur with the help of problem formulations that make it possible to represent the normal experiential contents of the life world as an already successful solution to the problem, but one that could also, perhaps, be otherwise. Ever since the 17th century, when humans began to distance themselves from the religious positing of the world, there has been a multitude of examples for this technique of addressing alternative solutions to problems. Against all plausibility, Descartes maintained that there is no connection between the present moment and its preceding and following moments. God must create the world anew at every moment. This solution to the problem was later replaced by the thesis of a world historical consciousness, which establishes itself in its own temporal horizons. Or Hobbes maintained that every human being fears all others and is thereby induced to preventive hostility, which all the more compels the other, who has been calculated into this equation, to try to get a jump on him. If one poses a problem in this equally counterintuitive way, then it is possible to hold the state responsible for the creatio continua. Another author maintains that if someone gives something to someone else, there is no possibility, when this later becomes a matter of gratitude or repayment, of communicating about the value of the gift. Here, the solution refers to the market price mechanism. And that actually, so that sentence, I think it might be a reference to Baudrillard. And I would be interested, actually, not I would be interested. I am looking forward to seeing if there is any kind of back and forth at all between Baudrillard and Luhmann. Luhmann is a bit older than Baudrillard, but this was written in the 80s. This book was published in it wasn't written in the 80s. This book was published in the early 80s, like 84, I think. So it's very possible that is a reference to Baudrillard. It's also very possible that it's not. But I think it might be. A final example. Oh, hold on. Shit. A final example relates to education. How is it possible to educate someone to be free if this requires the influence of the educator on his pupil? In all these cases, it would be banal, but this is what occurs normally, to refer the problem back to the life world, to historical facticity, to functioning institutions. For what is at stake is precisely a reconstruction of this life world against the background of other possibilities. Two things stand out in these examples of early theoretical attempts to explain what is normal and improbable. They are all processed with reference to the problem of time, and they all refer to special problems of specific function systems. In both regards, they maintain initially dependent on problems that must be handled right up front in the conversion of the societal system from an order of estates to a functionally differentiated system and brought into new semantic forms. Even the question of how social order is possible acquires analytical rigor. In the modern, specifically scientific style of reflection, and in the past 100 years, sociology in particular has begun to seek its theoretical integration in such formulations of the question. In specifically sociological formulations of the problem, one can distinguish both models of questioning and correspondingly both neat, helpful theories and theories fascinated by the probability of the improbable. For a long time, the former had the tradition to themselves, and the latter appeared only when one explicitly asked how social order is possible. The predominant interpretation in the tradition sees the problem of social order as the avoidance or subjugation of offensive behavior, of inimical, disturbing, and destructive activities that prevent others from enjoying their rights, satisfying their needs, and feeling safe in social relations. Pax et Justitia, or security and order, were the guiding formulas, and a good police the means of achieving them. Security and order were the guiding formulas, and a good police the means of achieving them. According to this interpretation, the constitution of a legal political order, Hobbes, or of an adequate value consensus, counted as the inevitable precondition for forming social systems. Since this precondition was always already fulfilled, it legitimated the existing order. Taking this as the starting point, one can exclude the basic problem. If questions about the origin of these preconditions arise, they are handed over to theories of evolution and socialization. One cannot help asking whether the basic problem in the constitution of social systems really lies in eliminating what is harmful or cannot adapt. Or, in a more pointed formulation, is it enough to conceive social order as a boycotting of boycotting? Or must one not know from the beginning how it is generally possible and sufficiently probable? The second interpretation begins by asking about conditions of possibility, and thereby seeks at once a more abstract and a broader theoretical foundation, e.g., one that includes conflicts as systems. The radicalization of the problem of double contingency clears the way to this interpretation. It articulates the question, how is social order possible, in a way that presents this possibility as, above all, improbable. If everyone acts contingently, and thus everyone could also act differently, and knows this about oneself and others, and takes it into account, it is, for the moment, improbable that one's own action will generally find points of connection, and with them a conferral of meaning, in the actions of others. Self-commitment would presuppose that others commit themselves, and vice versa. Along with the improbability of social order, this concept explains its normality. Under the condition of double contingency, every self-commitment, however accidentally arisen or however calculated, will acquire informational and connective value for the action of others, precisely because such a system is formed in a closed and self-referential way, namely, A is determined by B and B by A. Every accident, every impulse, every error is productive. The genesis of the system presupposes structured complexity in the sense of non-arbitrary distributions. Without noise, no system. But under this condition, the emergence, however brief, however conflictual, of order is normal, because for those who commit themselves to an action, double contingency is brought into experience, and thus a double-sided contingent ego-alter constellation can be produced. At first glance, it may seem surprising that the doubling of improbability, related to every specific behavioral choice, leads to probability. This does not concern a simply linear problem of increase or decrease. If, in addition to one's own behavioral uncertainty, another's behavioral selection also is uncertain and depends on one's own behavior, The possibility arises of orienting oneself to that and determining one's own behavior in regard to it. Thus, it is the emergence of a social system, which is made possible by a doubling of improbability, and which then facilitates the determination of its own behavior. And that's the end of section 3. I think this is a cool way to look at thrownness or fallenness. And I think this is the way that I handle fallenness and thrownness. Like it is what it is. And I could spend, all my life staring at my belly button and or maundering and or being like, oh, I don't like stuff and that makes me sad. And so I'm going to be sad about it. Or I could choose to be like, I see my belly button and I'm like, oh, I don't like stuff. And even be sad about it. And I could be sad and I could be like, oh, I don't like stuff and it makes me sad. But instead of just like sitting around and like doing the masturbatory thing, well, okay. Now it's up to me to try to do something about the fact that I don't like stuff instead of just sitting around and being sad and doing the slow suicide thing. And so I like that. Like I'm like, okay, cool. That's thrownness, or at least that's a way to deal with thrownness. But also, again, going back to your lecture on your critical media theory lecture the other day and talking about Levinas, totality, and infinity. It's interesting. I guess it's opened up a new system, a new social system between a Levinasian view and this Luhmannian view, where we are reacting to the infinity. We're reacting to the virtual potentials or the possibilities, the infinite possibilities of the other. And yeah, it's just, I guess, different ways to articulate this double contingency, or what I like to call constructivism. And again, so going back to constructivism, I guess, is a response to not formalism, functionalism. So not doing, like, constructivism is not a social relativism thing, or what people say when they say subjectivism, which they're getting it wrong. But like it's not that. Like it's not to say social relativism, which people who do social constructivism, they are doing like absolute relativism, which is such a stupid word, or such a stupid phrase. Absolute relativism doesn't make sense. But constructivism is this system or this whatever, like, where we are the ones who are doing the thing. Like, we are simultaneously doing the things that we are reacting to. And I guess maybe simultaneity isn't a necessary thing there either, but we are the ones who are doing the things to which we are reacting and responding. And that is constructing the world around us. So it's kind of Kantian, I guess, right? But anyway, that was my thoughts on that. So when you get back, if you have anything to add to that, I actually would be interested to hear, because I want to hear you react to me trying to inject Heidegger and Levinas into this. But we'll move on with section 4. So section 4, here we go. We must now raise the question of how the problem of double contingency solves itself, in scare quotes, or formulated a little less pointedly, how the appearance of the problem comes to initiate a process of solving it. For this, the self-referential circle is decisive. I will do what you want if you do what I want. In a rudimentary form, this circle is a new unity that cannot be reduced to either of the participating systems. It may be present in each of the participating systems as a content of consciousness or a theme of communication, but that always presupposes that it is also present in other systems. This presupposition does not emerge arbitrarily, no matter what its basis in reality may be. In marginal cases, it may rest on error. The other did not see me at all or did not regard me as a possible interaction partner. But once it is activated, it creates the corresponding reality, even if this reality is only to give the other the possibility of refusing to enter into it and breaking off contact immediately. We do not have to analyze the causes of this circle any further. What comes into being is always new and always the same, namely, a circularly closed unity. In this unity, the determination of every element depends on that of another, and the unity consists precisely in this. One can also characterize this basic fact as a self-conditioning indeterminacy. I love that. That should be a vocabulary term. Self-conditioning indeterminacy. One can also characterize this basic fact as a self-conditioning indeterminacy. I do not allow myself to be determined by you if you do not allow yourself to be determined by me. As one can see, this is an extremely unstable core structure, which immediately collapses if it does not continue. But this initial position is adequate to define a situation that contains in itself the possibility of forming a social system. This situation owes its unity to the problem of double contingency. It is also irreducible to one of the participating systems. For each system, it is a factor in that system's relation to its environment, but at the same time, it is the core around which an emergent system-environment relation can crystallize. Thus, the social system is based on instability. It necessarily realizes itself as an autopoietic system. It works with a circularly closed basic structure that would collapse at any moment if this were not prevented. Formally, this occurs by de-tautalization, and as far as energy and information are concerned, by utilizing the environment. And environment, Luhmann's environment, it's like background. It's like the world. It's like a referential totality. I don't know if that needs to be clarified, but maybe it does. So there's system and then there's environment. And I don't know. I don't think it needs to be clarified. But environment is background. Environment is referential totality. Environment is the world as world. And then system is us, basically. Within the history of theory, this move integrates conceptual formations that have emerged separately. The theorem of double contingency and the theory of autopoietic systems converge, and this convergence makes it possible to introduce a subject-free concept of action as a concept for observing the basal elements of social systems. We will come back to this with specific analyses in the chapter on communication and action. But here we can already say that the problem of double contingency provides the behavior of the participating systems. However, it may be conditioned organically and physically with an additional quality. Such behavior reduces the indeterminacy that follows from double contingency. In this way, a behavior qualifies as action. It finds itself released into the realm of double contingent uncertainty, such that every performance means selection and every selection limitation. That's another good one. On the level of the emergence of social systems, the elements out of which these systems produce themselves are constituted first, and this autopoiesis requires the constitution of the unity of the system as a self-referential circle. Pure double contingency. I don't know if autopoetic needs to be defined here either. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Autopoetic kind of means self-producing. So there's poiesis and there's praxis, and these are two different types of action. And actually now I can't even goddamn think of the distinction between poiesis and praxis. Yeah, autopoiesis basically self-producing, but that's not a bulletproof translation, but I think it's a functional translation.
Yo. I washed hella dishes. There's a point when I was listening, because I listen to books like all the time. And then you interpolated me while I was washing dishes, and I was like, oh, it's not. I was like, oh, it's not an audiobook.
Yeah, dude. You had a never ending story moment when Bastian, when he's like, they can't be talking to me. You haven't seen the never ending story. I forgot.
Yeah, but it sounds like, yeah, no, I get it. That would be. Mm-hmm.
So he's in the attic of the school and it's stormy outside and he's reading like this super dope book, which actually the book is dope. The movie's dope, but the book is different. It's a weird, creepy German book. But in the movie, Bastian is reading the book, and then the characters in the book actually start calling out to him, and they show the scene on him sitting in the attic. It's stormy outside, and he just doesn't believe it. He's like, they can't be talking about me. There's no way in fucking hell they can be talking about me. Like, he has this weird moment. But that's funny. I actually also just had a moment of like, I feel like I'm like I feel like it's a rainy afternoon and I'm like kind of in a time outside of time, like I just had a weird moment of that too.
But it's not rainy there. It just kind of feels like it is.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, something about, it feels like, oh, it's a rainy afternoon and we're like fucking off, but we're definitely not fucking off right now. But I feel like it.
The morning rain falls down my window and I can't sleep at all. Even if I could, it would all be great. Put your picture on the wall.
Stan, I got my wife in my trunk and I just tied her up.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. That is how that I do know that song because of Eminem, not because of the actual original song.
Okay.
Anyway, you wanted to hear my thoughts. I want to tell you a couple things about my thoughts. So yes. Oh my God. Get away from me. Sorry. Sneaky invasive platforms.
Where's Ryan?
He's a happy boy downstairs.
Cool.
Yeah, he's comfy. He's gone out several times today. Right now he is. Do you have some parental sort of instincts kicking in over here? You're like, what if Ryan's been like outside this whole time?
You mentioned you're gonna check and you didn't mention it when you came back.
Yeah, he's napped. He's been napping, but like I love when I like come downstairs and he's looking at me like this. Like he's just like he's so clearly struggling to wake up. He's like, and
yo.
Yeah, and it's funny because like when I come home, it's like I open the door and he's sitting there doing that. Like he just is waking up, but I know he wasn't sleeping right there. So what happened was he woke up, bolted, and now he's still waking up. And he's like,
yeah,
because he loves me so much. And he feels like he probably feels like it's his one job is to like greet us when we come home, you know. So
yep.
Anyway, okay. So for falling and thrownness, you caused me to hystericize myself, so I'm gonna hystericize you. I want you to like tell me what the difference between those two things is.
Yeah, man. And I think I have struggled with the difference between fallenness and thrownness.
See, I wish that you could do a thing where you search a PDF and you've just got a lot more filters. So you're able to say thrownness and or thrown, and then every time they occur within a paragraph of fall or fallen or fallenness. Like if you could put in like complex filters like that, oh, that would be so fucking sick. Because then it would make a brush up on it a lot easier than just actually going through the sections. But off the top of my head, thrownness concerns the facticity of being in the hermeneutic circle, having no outside to get an objective viewpoint from, always already being in language. It's like, oh, you're always in a situation. And at the time that you find yourself already in that situation, like you've been in it for a while, and the possibilities that are on your horizon aren't necessarily yours. Those are thrown there too, right? So it's like that whole thing. Whereas fallenness is a technical term for the downward. It feels like downward pulling. It is that feeling of inertia of being in a superficial social situation. But
which is why you can be fallen into thrownness.
I mean, we're definitely always falling in thrownness. Yeah. But that falling is the term that you use for this reciprocally determinative positive feedback loop, which is a bad feedback loop of the theys, ambiguity, curiosity, ambiguity, and idle talk. So which are all downstream from understanding discourse and state of mind. Like that's the important part is like, I don't know. I think whenever I've seen anybody use fallingness, it's like not nearly as interesting because they're just focusing on like an aspect of that, but it's like this structural thing. And so not only is that cycle, it has like this pulsion pulling you down and superficializing everything, but that each of those three things is downstream from like a higher capacity, right? Like modal understanding is upstream from ambiguity, right? And curiosity is like a mood, is like a sort of superficialized mood for him, because we're not talking about like the higher form of curiosity. We're talking about like this kind of base sense, bored curiosity, trying to keep yourself entertained. And then idle talk is downstream from discourse. And so we're used to discourse, and then we come around people who have never done discourse or they don't respect discourse, and all they do is idle talk. And we're supposed to play this fucking game with them. We're supposed to act like, yeah, I'm into this. Ha 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 ha. And it's just like so disenchanting, you know? Sorry, but what were you saying?
I like fascination rather than curiosity, because you get fascinated by shiny objects, and curiosity has a good connotation in English, where it's like, oh, you're curious. That's good. So fascination. When I read Heidegger saying curiosity, I go to something like fascination.
Yeah, because he says we were enthralled. We're enthralled by it. And it's like, that is how I feel scrolling my phone. That is how I feel like looking at some drama content. It's like, ooh. And then I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I don't give a shit about these people. And I don't even believe any of this stuff that I'm reading. You know?
Yeah.
Okay. As far as Levinas goes, I think that this is a really interesting way of talking about infinity. He even said the word infinity at one point in the context of talking about double contingency. I can see why my lecture about Levinas got you thinking about double contingency. I think that Levinas and Heidegger are fundamentally opposed. I think that they're each probably also fundamentally opposed to Luhmann, but I'm not sure exactly how or why yet. And so at this level, I can just kind of agree that there's some similarities at the level of uncertainty, the unknown, about the other, not exactly knowing how to satisfy the other, having a desire for the other. This creates the sort of neurotic play of our inner lives that requires and builds, adapts to, and modifies the social systems that we are in. Like, I think that there's definitely a lot to be done there. So yeah, you wanted my reaction. And ultimately, this is a react video. This is in the genre of reaction videos. Yeah.
The fucking thumbnail. Just like, and then the cover of the book, and we're like,
dude, we really should start doing that. Like, we kind of did that with the thumbnail for the Comfort Crisis. That was like, I think if we just started doing like way over the top like thumbnails, that'd probably be a good idea. All right. Anyway, sorry, folks. We could do this meta thing all day, and we know it's why you're really here for it. You're here for us doing that meta thing, but the fuck? But let's get to it. So, is it my turn? Are you still reading? You're still reading. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to start the document, by the way.
Sick. Pure double contingency, that is, a completely indeterminate situation, never occurs in our societal reality. Nevertheless, this point of departure is sufficient for further pursuit of specific questions. One can, for example, mull over the question, if everything can, through self-limitation, break the circle of heterodetermination, then what, in particular, can do so? Where lie the selective advantages that apparently lead to the emergence of specific social systems instead of others? If one formulates the question thus, then everything that constitutes a part of the pre-understanding,
welcome to Theory
interesting, of the situation can be interpreted as an opportunity to guide selection. In addition, one can ask, even if only for the still open domain of remaining contingency, whether it is not possible to acquire more general insights about the relative likelihood that particular offerings of meaning will prevail. In other words, what seems best when the situation is an open one and the problem is to pre-construct succeeding events and increase their probability through self and other limitation. In the temporal dimension, the advantage of speed surely plays a role. The themes that are preferred are those to which one can quickly contribute something. Chains of selections that can operate faster suppress those that require one to deliberate how one is going to react. This includes the fact that whoever can operationalize something first enjoys an advantage. In the fact and social dimensions, this depends primarily on connectivity. This means that the next event that will be chosen is the one that already makes clear what its succeeding event will be. As with the much disputed evolution of life, differences in speed and the formation of sequences seem to be what makes it possible for structures to emerge in situations where that is improbable. However questions of this type are answered, it is important for an evolutionary or morphogenetic interpretation of this kind that the rules according to which some selective advantages establish themselves and others are blocked have no similarity to the resulting structures. That is, do not function like models or plans. Thus, one can construct a highly complex system using the simplest rules. And at the same time, the system takes care that a consolidation already achieved continues to work as a selective advantage in further play. Along with speed and connectivity, and precisely because it secures the advantages of speed and connectivity, the status quo always has its day. Bum, bum, bum.
All right. I'm going to take it here. I'll take it for a ride. If a system experiences a situation in which it is participating as doubly contingent, its behavior is affected. Thus, double contingency is a problem that as a problem produces effects. Behavior becomes action if it is found to be determined differently. Furthermore, temporal boundaries emerge under the pressure of double contingency. A purely autistically motivated behavior by an individual person will continue, even if other persons enter or leave the field of reciprocal perception. The experience of double contingency, by contrast, enables and even compels a meta-perspective that gives behavioral sequences temporal boundaries, namely, that disciplines behavior by giving it a periodic structure in which each act knows and reflects itself as having an end and giving way to others' behavior. Thus, the problem of double contingency has the properties of an catalytic factor. Without itself being consumed, it enables the construction of structures on a new level of ordering, which is regulated by the perspective on perspectives. Thereby, and this is why one can speak of autocatalysis, the problem of double contingency is itself a component of the system that it forms. The experience of contingency gives rise to the formation of systems and is itself only possible because of the formation of systems and because the system provides the experience of contingency with themes, with information, and with meaning. One sec. Just test. Bum, 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 bum. I'm never hitting the red on voice meter, but I am getting into it slightly on OBS, and that's weird to me. I don't know why it comes in heavier on OBS than it does on voice meter. Voice meter should be sovereign in this situation. Whatever.
Yeah, man, it's annoying.
It's stupid.
Audio.
I don't think I'm blasting out everybody's earbuds. I'm hoping I'm not, folks. If I am, just stab your eyes out with glass and just keep listening. It doesn't fucking matter. All right.
Doesn't fucking matter.
Nothing does.
Exactly.
Please don't do what I just said. As soon as a social system detaches itself from physico-chemico, organico-physical reality by reacting to its own problem of double contingency and forms its own elements and boundaries, the possibility of chance emerges for it. Chance is produced along with the emergence of systems so that they have at their disposal enough disorder for their own reproduction. Here, as always, chance does not mean the complete lack of conditions and causes, but the lack of coordination between events and systems structures. An absent coordination that has something negative can, however, produce effects within the system and trigger causal processes. What the experience of contingency achieves is the constitution and opening up of chance for conditioning functions within the system. Thus, the transformation of chance into structural probabilities. Everything else is a question of selecting what proves its worth and what has further usefulness. Wherever one encounters another under the condition of reciprocally experienced double contingency, a condition of contact can be achieved only by agreement between selective behavioral determinations, and this is achieved only by forming systems. The connection between double contingency and system formation carries with it no guarantee of permanence. It says nothing about whether the system that has formed will continue or be broken off. It merely provides the basis for the chance of selecting what provisionally succeeds, satisfies, and seems worth continuing. It enables the evolution of specifically social orders, so that evolution means only the construction and destruction of structured orderings on an emergent level of reality. The autocatalyst of social systems creates its own catalytic agent, namely the problem of double contingency itself. This becomes clear when one analyzes more closely how and why reciprocal indeterminacies occur in behavior. Behavior is not in itself indeterminable, not naturally free in the sense of open to arbitrary determination. The behavior of others is indeterminable only in the situation of double contingency, and specifically for the person who tries to predict it in order to use this prediction to determine his own behavior. Thus, an indeterminacy created by prediction emerges within the meta perspective of double contingency. However routine and expected a behavior may become, if the ability to predict this behavior is used to motivate complementary behavior, then that may become a motive to change the predictable behavior in order to remove the basis for the prediction and uncouples the connective behavior based on it. If ego knows that alter knows that ego is concerned with predicting alter's behavior, then ego has to consider the effect of this anticipation. This cannot occur as improved foresight because that would only reintroduce the problem. The problem is repeated on all levels on which it is reflected. In other words, alter, the other, acquires the possibility of escaping this foresight to the extent that the foresight is specified, and this means to the extent that connective interests become apparent. Only if, but always if, alter's action is predicted can he act otherwise, or make the fulfillment of the expectation conditional. The prediction enables, even stimulates, its own refutation. Whatever lies to hand as possibilities of determination is emptied out and thrown back to be reformulated. The self-reference built into the circle of reciprocal consideration becomes negative, and with that, productive. One thing I wanted to mention is that I think Levinas is consciously challenging the idea of ego versus alter. And so like this idea that alter, I think we should keep the word other separate from, because I added it there on my own. I was like alter, and then I said other. But it's like, no, actually that really doesn't work. And to keep them distinct, like we'll have to eventually think the difference between other and alter, because the ego always does engage with the other as an alter, but that is a totalization. It is a reduction. It is a reference to the same. And the other, for Levinas, like the most important thing about the other is that it escapes that relation. And that's the fact that it escapes that relation is even more disconcerting than double contingency, right? Like, so I think that's true, but then again, we might be able to easily bring them back together on this. I'm not sure. Openness to new conditioning rests on the same condition as negativity, namely on the doubling of contingency. Actually, no, hold on. I'm curious enough that I actually want to do this really quick. Let's see here. Yeah, so page 13 from Totality and Infinity. The other person as he comes before me in a face-to-face encounter is not an alter ego, another self with different properties and accidents, but in all essential respects, like me. This may be the expression of an optimistic hope from a self-centered point of view, which is often verified. The other may indeed turn out to be, on the surface at least, merely an analog of myself, but not necessarily. I may find him to be inhabiting a world that is basically other than mine and to be essentially different from me. He is not a mere object to be subsumed under one of my categories and given a place in my world. Most of us are now familiar with this other reducing theory, which Sartre propounds in His Being and Nothingness. Now, this is not actually Levinas writing at this point. This is Alfonso Lingus, the translator, doing his introduction. He's really introducing Levinas to Americans for the first time in this. And so basically, Sartre does reduce the other to an alter ego, to an alter. Yeah. I'll finish the paragraph. It may describe a widespread manner of dealing with the other person, but it fails to do justice to his own experience, as is clearly indicated by the slavery and rebellion to which it leads. Nor finally do we take account of these inner depths of alien existence by regarding the other along Hegelian lines as a mere negation of the self. This only encompasses him in a supposedly neutral system that is readily identified with the rational self. Can it be the underlying unifying one of our monistic system? Can it be the underlying unifying one of our monistic systems has been the avaricious, power-seeking, organizing self-same self? Can it be that the underlying unifying one of our monistic systems has been the avarice, power-seeking, organizing self-same self? Okay, so that's and I was just thinking about that because it's like apparently Levinas is consciously taking on this idea. And I think that an example of that is like he is following from Buber's I and Thou. And in I and Thou, the thou, there's like its and there's thous, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's even true for Heidegger. It's like, it's a difference between a what and a
who.
And a who. Yes, there you go. But for Levinas, he thinks that that this Buberian relation between I and thou still flattens, reduces, and
because the other is simply unknowable. Like that's
you're saying for Levinas because the other is fundamentally
unknowable.
I
was asking like because I've always thought like thou included that, like thou included like I and thou. Well, no, because it is in reference to I, right? Like thou, oh, you're just another thing like me. Whereas the other is fundamentally unknowable. And so I can assume that it's like me.
Right.
But I shouldn't take that assumption to the bank. Or,
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. All right. Openness to new conditioning rests on the same condition as negativity, namely on the doubling of contingency. Ego experiences alter as alter ego, but along with the non-identity of perspectives, ego also experiences the identity of this experience on both sides. The situation is interminable, unstable, and unacceptable for both the participants. In this experience, the perspectives converge, and that makes it possible to suppose an interest in negating this negativity, an interest in determination. Formulated in the terms of general systems theory, this provides a state of conditional readiness, a suspended possibility of system formation that can use almost any chance situation to develop structures. This premise of a basic problem that operates autocatalytically is in many ways at odds with widely held theoretical assumptions. It does not agree with the assumption of a nature in the sense of something that is sui generis, or with the assumption of an a priori in the sense of something valid in itself. Instead, it assumes emergent levels of order as autonomous in the sense of the theory of self-referential systems, autonomous with regard both to an enabling from below and to a conditioning from above, even more so with regard to the hypostazizations of relations of dependence in concepts like mind or matter. Into the place of such concepts of last resort steps the idea of a problem that becomes productive under the condition of the adequate complexity of existing reality. A concept of double contingency serves to grasp this problem more precisely for the emergent level of social systems, and it simultaneously channels the counter question of what adequate complexity of existing reality means here. Thus, the notion of double contingency combines quite differently from what one has earlier expected from the concept of roles, a theory of the self-regulation of social systems with a hint of biomycoorganico-psychical substrates. Of course, when we speak of problems here, we do not mean only the artifacts of the art of scientific problematization, although the concept of problems, the concept of double contingency, and the concept of autocatalysis are formed in the system-specific context of scientific efforts and must find their home, function, and confirmation there. They mean real facts in the domain of the objects to be analyzed. Thus, we maintain that there are problems, and not only for science. Reality reacts to the problems that occur within it by selection. Problems are the factually effective catalytic agents of social life. This is the fundamental idea that dialectics, perhaps somewhat hastily interpreted as a process. Reality reacts to the problems that occur within it by selection. Problems are the factually effective catalytic agents of social life. This is the fundamental idea that dialectics is somewhat hastily interpreted as a process. In systems theory, it is enriched and articulated by concepts like complexity, self-reference, and meaning. This is great. I want to say my reaction so far is, so what? Like, I do like his writing. I do like his care. I do see connections here with other things. But I think we might have jumped the gun here by going to chapter 3, because he has referenced previous chapters a few times, and he has referenced upcoming chapters, which means that even though you could take these as standalone chapters, in the writing of it, he is kind of thinking, okay, you got something that I've already done here, so I'll keep going. And so I think that, like, after this, I don't know, I'm going to suggest we go back to 1 and then 2. And if he wrote the introduction and it's not written by someone else, then yeah, we should also read the introduction. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know if he has an introduction. I know there is
the
a
introduction's
long,
by someone
not
else.
long, but yeah, there is an introduction by someone else on this. And I don't know if he wrote one or not, but yeah, like there are definitely some things that, like when I was reading, that's why I was kind of questioning, well, should that be defined? Should we define that? Should we define that? Like autopoiesis and system environment. Like these are things that he definitely deals with. And then also like he's referencing Parsons and functionalism and
Right. Did he already talk about that stuff somewhere else?
yeah, he talks about, like he introduces Parsons. I can't remember if it's in chapter 1 or 2, but
okay.
There's definitely some stuff that it is a little odd and clunky going through it. And so I was like a little unsure.
Dude, it's cool because like it'll just get quilted different and that's fine. And also I don't think that we've done anyone a disservice not unpacking any of those things. And you did actually with autopoiesis, but and system environment. Look, what matters is that you point out that it's different and then people pay attention and then they get the hang of it. It's like learning French, German, any language. Like you just got to get in the deep end, get lost and let your brain panic a little bit and cast about and sleep on it and come back to it and make it a way of life. For right now, I think the big question for me, when I say, so what, part of what I mean is like, I want to know what this is for, like, and how I'll use it. And of course, it's too soon to tell. With any great thinker, you really just got to get lost in them. And what they're going to be for you as an individual is different from what they actually are. And so, you got to kind of be with them. And so, it's just part of the process. But this is kind of my question. And I think I would suspect me if my first reaction was just like, oh, this is fire, but then I couldn't tell you what it's for and how I'm going to use it. But I do like his authorial clarity. There's something special to it. That's nice. And I think that it kind of teaches us something about how to write.
Mm. Yeah. I think I have a so what. But also I am suspicious of that so what, because I think I've been a fan of my idea of Luhmann for, I don't know, years, but I've also never really sat down and read like, I mean, I've only read like 3 books in my entire life, right? So who knows? So I'm suspicious of it. But also coming to Luhmann after reading Heidegger and like having some of the discussions and like, I don't know, like I definitely have new eyes. And I'm stoked. And now like I'm already like, oh, well, fucking Merleau-Ponty. And like, I'm already like kind of doing, I don't know. I'm doing a lot more work in the reading of this, than me of even last year was even capable of doing. So I'm fucking stoked.
That's awesome. Good. Let's do this thing. I'm going to pull up my own copy here so I can copy and paste shit.
Oh, yeah. Get that doc open.
Oh, I haven't. Did I actually share it with you? I don't think I shared it with you yet. I think I shared some other document with you.
No, not yet.
Yeah, I'll share it with you in a bit.
Section 6. To accept this idea of double contingency as a problem that operates autocatalytically has far-reaching consequences for the theoretical structure erected upon it. This theory deals with free-floating reality, a self-grounding enterprise, and this gives it, as theory, an odd tonal complexion, a particular coloring. It can base the maintenance of social order neither on nature nor on norms or values that are valid a priori. What is there to take their place? Since the 17th century, it has been believed the basis of order must lie in what is concealed and unknowable. Latency is a necessary requirement of order. The hand that guides everything remains invisible. The chains from which everything depends are secured in unknowable heights. The motives for action are unintentionally ordered by a ruse of reason. Metaphors of this kind attempted to offer a compromise to the religions, which in their own ways could praise, determine, and formulate the unknowable. But society itself could not opt for any of the various religions. Therefore, it had to remain satisfied with the general formula of unintelligibility. This, at least, was clearly and correctly observed. In fact, one needed no grounds for consensus in order to secure continuation of the existing social order, any more than one needs optics in order to serve. But the extent of the structural changes that one could observe after the French Revolution or in the wake of the Industrial Revolution led to a loss of plausibility. To what extent could one try to correct an invisible hand? How much could one swing on the chains suspended in the unknowable without their breaking? Sociology addressed these questions at the very beginning of its history, but sociology could no longer answer them by reference into the dark. It demanded another theory. Usually this was done, following Weber and Durkheim, by recourse to a foundational value consensus, a civil religion, or a belief in legitimacy. The formulations vary in accordance with how strongly one emphasizes political domination as a guarantee of order. Parsons explicitly related this concept to double contingency and provided the definitive version of it. The double contingency implies the normative orientation of action. Since Alter's reaction to punishment and reward is superadded to Alter's intrinsic or direct behavioral reaction to ego's original selection. If punishment or reward by Alter is repeatedly manifested under certain conditions, this reaction acquires for ego the meaning of an appropriate consequence of ego's conformity with or deviation from the norms of a shared symbolic system. Such a system, with its mutuality of normative orientation, is logically the most elementary form of culture. In this elementary social relationship, as well as in large-scale social systems, culture provides the standards, value orientation, which are applied in evaluative processes. Without culture, neither human personalities nor human social systems would be possible. And that, I love that, dude. That's like, yeah. The answer is clear, but it does not solve our problem. It assumes that if a social system is to prove itself capable of survival, adequate value consensus and adequate understanding about the shared symbolic system must be achieved. The possibility of doing this is assumed. Parsons should have underlined repeatedly instead of shared symbolic system. One ought to consider whether more recent developments in theory do not already imply that time and history increasingly step into the theoretical slots where nature, norms, or values formerly functioned as providers of certainty. This occurs in part covertly, as with Parsons repeatedly, in part in analyses of fact that, theoretically speaking, have not been fully worked out. For example, analyses of strategies for initiating intimate relations or testing trust. At first, the 19th century tried to replace the a prioris, which were no longer persuasive, with a belief in the direction of the historical process, interpreting evolution as progress. This form of substituting time and history for foundational certainty failed, but it does not exhaust the possibilities. If one views time as the structure of a selection process that continually balances irreversibilities and reversibilities, one can immediately see that the foundations of every selection must be created by selection and be solidified by use, in the continuing selection process so that redissolution becomes harder, though not surely impossible. An example can clarify this. Until now, the binding effect of contracts has been discussed mainly from the viewpoint of justifying a norm that requires contracts to be kept, pacta sunt servanda. The difficulties in justifying such a norm with unconditional certainty have led to proposed replacements. Durkheim put the moral fact, society, in this position. Hans Kelsen, the epistemological hypothesis of a basic norm. The expectations directed toward the grounding power of grounds were not changed, however. Only the theory of self-referential systems can force such a change. What counts as the legal form of contracts is only a marginal condition for coordinating selections that bind themselves as they reciprocally adjust to one another, use one another, build on one another, and reject alternatives. For this, they need and have time. In symbolic interactionism, one speaks of negotiated order or negotiated identities. The indispensable condition here is that every selection be experienced as contingent and that a temporal succession be created so that the selections can reciprocally determine one another, leaping ahead and reverting to what, from their respective temporal positions, is the future and what is the past. Both of these together, namely contingency and time, constitute the basis of the binding, and contract is the form that makes this together in differentiation from other forms of coincidence possible. Formulated more abstractly, time is not simply the measure of a motion that is knowable, calculable, feasible, and repeatable insofar as one knows which states lead to which other ones. Time is not simply a chronology that depends on natural laws, nor is time organized with regard to a good end, one that processes will normally attain. Time is not simply teleology. Time is the asymmetrization of self-reference in light of the order of selections, and in the social domain, it temporalizes the double contingency of social action, including the self-references in play therein, with the result that the emergence of improbable order is almost inevitable wherever double contingency is experienced. With an additional remark, we can refer this sense of time's relevance back to the problem of double contingency. Double contingency is given primarily in a symmetrical form, as an uncertainty that is in principle equal for both sides. As symmetry, it is a self-reflective problem. The other is an alter ego, or, as formulated by Goddard Gunther, the you is always an I in thematic reversal. But it is not this alone. It is also an alter ego. One can anticipate another's action and connect onto it if one exploits its temporal localization. The problem is raised symmetrically. The solution is guided by asymmetrization as it progresses, and consensus or dissent are the results, namely resymmetrizations. Once again, they are consensus and dissent for both sides in the same way.
Seven. The thesis that double contingency necessarily leads to the formation of social systems and in this sense operates autocatalytically as an enduring problem and not just as an impulse can be clarified further by a theoretical comparison using the example of system boundaries. We will choose as our point of departure Simmel's excursus on the formation of social boundaries. Right at the beginning of this excursus, one finds the thesis. Quote, whenever the interests of two elements hold for the same object, the possibility of their coexistence depends on the fact that a boundary line within the object divides their spheres. According to Simmel, a process of boundary determination is always set in motion when one enters into social relations. But the boundaries that Simmel has in mind do not separate the social system from its environment. They cut through the object according to this difference. My sphere of influence, your sphere of influence, my rights, your rights, the side that I can see, the side that you can see. Thus, interaction is formed over a boundary, as in a game of tennis. Common zones may be more or less broadly laid out, and everyone may more or less enter into the other's sphere. But finally, an intimate domain for the other must be preserved. He must be granted a right to things of his own and to secrets. Thus, black boxes are a moral principle, the private property in the soul's being. You see, something could be done there for sure with Levinas. Like you say, it's a moral problem, you know, it's like, and it's a black box it's like the black boxes are a moral principle, the private property of the soul's being. That's in quotes though. So I think he's riffing off of Simmel. From the perspective of systems theory, this interpretation considers only the system reference of psychic systems. The social system's own world is not seen because the theorem of double contingency is lacking. With catalytic intervention by the problem of double contingency and the selection that it sets in motion, entirely different boundaries emerge. They do not separate and combine individuals. Instead, they constitute the social system's own domain in relation to what is environment for the system. Whatever contributes to solving the problem of double contingency belongs in the system. Whatever emerges in confirmations or connective selections is attributed to the system itself. Everything else, above all, of course, the enormous amounts of meaning that were a subject about which no one ever spoke, is a whole attributed to the environment. Thus, a political party is not interested in knowing whether its members brush their teeth in the morning, afternoon, or evening, or why leaves are green, or why suns are capable of remaining in a state of equilibrium. A social system can define its boundaries as more or less open and permeable, but it must then internally determine the rules of selection by whose help themes can be accepted or rejected. Through the connection between selections and further selections in the course of communication, a domain of what is to be accepted and expected condenses, and its boundaries cut across the world of meaning. Psychic systems thereby become persons, namely, collages of expectations. This may imply more and also less than the psychic systems are aware of. Look at that, ending a sentence with a preposition. Fine when he does it. Fucking bust my fucking balls if I do it. Fuck off, dude. Next time, I swear to God, I'll be like, Niklas Luhmann did it. Suck my dick. Anyway, that's how I feel every time I read a genius. Great thinkers are almost always breaking the rules that we're told. And think inside of this rule. Use this rule. And it's like, they don't. But, oh, that's right. We're being trained. We're being schooled to just be dumb little workers. And they just want us to have tidy business writing. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, there's theoretical specificity here. It would have sounded really clunky if he did it the way he's supposedly supposed to. This may, I'm going to reread it. This may imply more and also less than the psychic systems are aware of. Other supplies of meanings, too, are only partially incorporated according to organizing ideas that have proved their worth within the system. Books can be mere house decorations or the products of publishers, library possessions, or the communicative themes of a specific scientific group. Environmental protection has a very different meaning depending on whether it falls within the province of the Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior, or the Department of Education, and depending on whether a forester, a policeman, or a landscape gardener is concerned with it. The double contingency absorbed by the system's formation operates, then, as both a facilitator of and a barrier to communication. The strength of such boundaries is explained by the fact that the readmission of fully indeterminate contingencies falls within what is unreasonable. One can always move the boundaries, expand or contract the scope of reasonableness, but once the system has a history, this can be done only point for point, only for specific themes, and only as an exception.
Section 8. One of the most important consequences of double contingency is the emergence of trust or distrust. When entering into situations with double contingency is experienced as particularly risky, they appear. The other can act otherwise than I expected, precisely if and because he knows what I expect. He can leave his intentions unclear or be deceptive about them. If this possibility always forced one to renounce social relations, then social systems could hardly ever form, or could do so only in a narrow, short-lived sense, perhaps like the contact of primitive societies with strangers at tribal borders, where an institution of trust, the guest, formed. For the formation of social systems to overcome an ever-present threshold of anxiety, corresponding nevertheless strategies are required. These strategies may be trust or distrust, and the first relief this gives is that there is a choice and that one need not depend on just one basis for behavior. The problem is solved by a difference that simultaneously introduces specific selective sensibilities and the possibility of a switch from trust to distrust. As a strategy, trust possesses greater scope. Anyone who gives his trust considerably widens his potential for action. He can rely on unsure premises and by doing so increase their certainty value. It is difficult to deceive trust that has been given, which of course no longer holds if such trust amounts, according to social standards, to an incredible thoughtlessness. Thus, greater room for combinatory play and also more rationality becomes available to one's behavioral choices. Distrust is a more constraining, yet still a widening, strategy. One lets oneself run a risk only if one has taken precautions against eventualities. For example, has sanctions in hand or is adequately secured against losses. This difference in the scope for achieving order is also supported by the fact that trust itself suggests the transition to distrust and therefore surrounds itself with controlling sensibilities. Blind trust is looked upon as foolish, undesirable, and harmful. Minor indications of the misuse of trust or of previously overlooked qualities often are enough to trigger a radical change in the relation. And knowing this restabilizes the social system based on trust. The opposite process, the transition from distrust to trust, has entirely different problems to solve. It is not abrupt, but is achieved only gradually, if at all. It remains dependent on additional supports, e.g., law. Here, things are not going downhill, but arduously uphill in the direction of a more complex social order. One can study the typical characteristics of the autogenesis of social systems out of double contingency using the case of trust and distrust. What is more important is that trust and distrust can appear only in the domain of double contingency. They should not be confused with a general optimism or pessimism about life, fear of sickness or other misfortunes, preference for what is familiar, and so forth. Trust must be given contingently, that is, freely. It cannot be demanded or normatively prescribed. Trust has its social functional value as trust only if it sees the possibility of distrust and rejects it. Thus, it rests on negating its opposite. Moreover, precisely here the temporal structure and sequentiality of social relations construction are important. One begins with small risks and builds on confirmations, and the conferral of trust is facilitated if this is required from both sides. so that the trust of one can find a support in the trust of the other. Above all, trust has the circular, self-presupposing and confirming character that belongs to all structures emerging from double contingency. It makes the formation of systems possible and in return acquires strength from them for increased, riskier reproduction. This is why it depends on symbolic cover. It reacts to critical informations not because of the facts that they report, but because they function as indicators of trustworthiness. With all these characteristics, the trust-distrust syndrome is a special case, which becomes relevant only in certain special situations where one must enter into risks one cannot control in advance, or be forced to refuse participation. Basically, all situations with double contingency have this character because they always imply a sequence of entering into implicit self-determinations that bind one person before the other has correspondingly bound himself. To this extent, trust is a universal circumstance of action. This is concealed only because there are functionally equivalent strategies for security in situations almost without freedom of choice. For example, in the domain of law and organization. But here too, trust may be needed as a kind of redundant foundation for security if the usual behavioral regulations are shaken. However, one will then be more likely to resort to distrust than to trust because one lacks opportunities for learning and testing one's trust.
Section 9. We would like to return once more to the general theme of double contingency. In situations with double contingency, and consequently in all orderings that emerge from it, there is an explicitly self-referential state of affairs. The theory of the subject basing consciousness overlooked this and therefore was unable to clarify the decisive ambivalences in the conceptual framing of what it called the self. The connection between double contingency and self-reference is secured by the ego-alter ego constellation in a precise and rigorous sense. If an ego experiences an alter as alter ego and acts in this experiential context, every determination that ego gives to his action refers back to itself. The determination is reflected back by alter, not only in reality but in ego's anticipation as well, which means in the determination itself. The action understands itself not only as carrying out its intention, but also, and often primarily, as an action for you, against you, in front of you, as an action meant for perception, or as a document of its own intention that does not want to be understood as an intention of documentation. To what extent the participating persons, their morality, and their standing play a part is another question. For themselves, persons are always already highly aggregated self-references. First and foremost, the process of determination by basal self-reference begins on the level of individual actions. The self that is at stake here and that back references point out is nothing other than the action that has determined its meaning and is thereby, so to say, caught in the act, and so must take this into account. In this way, basal self-reference is always already built into the process of determining meaning, which constitutes actions in the first place. The elements of elemental events, out of which systems are formed, never appear without such self-reference. They are self-referentially constituted, and only on this basis develop their possibilities for building structures and potential for refinement. Thus, the primary self-reference is that of the elements created and made available for selective combination. Since this self-reference occurs through an alter ego, and thus is mediated through somebody who does not perform this special action himself, another level of self-reference is always in play, namely, reference to the social system that enables the basal self-reference and thereby itself participates in the course of the action. Thus, self-reference implies, on the one hand, that the action controls itself from the perspective of the alter ego, and on the other, that the action assigns itself to a social system in which this is the case. Along with the constitution of self-referential connections among actions, a social system self-reference emerges, namely, the incorporation of the domain of double contingency and its fact, temporal and social boundaries. As a participant in social situations, one can still behave autistically, but only in a demonstratively autistic way, and only by grasping both of the self-referential circles. I just love that he's using the term autistic. I know he just means basically solipsistic. I think that's what he means, but it's funny. First, that this distorts the action in the direction of demonstration, whether one wishes this or not. And second, that in the social system, it acquires a specific place value, triggers reactions, makes history, and in this way, gets out of control for the act itself. Elemental self-reference is a constitutional condition for social self-reference and vice versa, which says no more than that elements are elements only within systems. Any effect of the problem of double contingency as soon as it is posed goes through both these self-referential circles and ties them together. Thereby both forms of redirecting self-reference through the alter ego and through the social system reciprocally control and correct each other. In order to understand this more clearly, one must consider that the problem of double contingency looks different depending on whatever self-reference one views it from. If one assumes still indeterminate intentions to act facing each other, then the elemental self-reference cannot acquire a determining function because it gives way to indeterminateness as soon as it runs into alter ego and thus finds itself referred back to itself as being indeterminate. First and foremost, it then becomes important to interrupt and extend the short-circuited elemental self-reference of action. As long as ego cannot act without knowing how alter will act and vice versa, the system is underdetermined and thereby blocked. But for meaning systems, this means at the same time becoming highly sensitive to almost any determination. From the temporal perspective, double contingency works here as an accelerator of system construction. Beginning is easy. Strangers begin by reciprocally signaling each other indications of the most important behavioral foundations, the definition of the situation, social status, intentions. This initiates a system history that includes as well as reconstructs the problem of contingency. As a result, the system increasingly is occupied with arguments about a self-created reality, with handling facts and expectations that the system itself has helped to create, and that also determine greater or lesser behavioral scope than the indeterminate beginning. Double contingency is then no longer given in its original circular indeterminacy. Its self-reference has been de-tautologized. It has incorporated chance, has thereby grown, and appears against what is now determinate or still determinable only as being also otherwise possible. This, in turn, lets the second self-reference, that of action, as an element of a social system, come into play. Action acquires its selective determinacy together with the limited possibilities of being otherwise from its function as an element in the social system. Thus, two different versions of the problem of double contingency displace, overlap, and supplement each other. A short-circuited version that only reports indeterminacy, and a structured version that takes into account conditionings and limiting alternatives and depends on premises of the system. Both versions can change their guiding role within the process of the system's development, but normally it is difficult for a system that has already been structured to regenerate indeterminacies or even to return entirely to a state where there are no expectations. This is because system formation must enlist system history, and time must be experienced as irreversible. Therefore, the restoration of indeterminacy requires the form of contradiction. It does not revert to something ahistorical, but creates uncertainty about what follows from what has gone before. We will return to this in Chapter 9. The problem is displaced from an open into a structured form along the track of the self-reference contained in all double contingency. The underlying problem remains identical, but the displacement gradually diminishes the openness for chance stimulations and replaces this openness with ways of shaping problems that depend on structure. The system loses its indiscriminate openness to anything whatsoever and acquires sensitivity to specific items. This differentiates the system and its environment. System and environment are no longer virtually congruent as indeterminacy and openness to all possibilities. Instead, insofar as its own selection history comes into play, the system acquires an environment in which much is possible, but only a little is relevant. Outwardly emerge environmental horizons that present the world that remains and against which appear the objects and themes with which the system is concerned. Inwardly, double contingency remains as an internal horizon that includes possibilities for action that could always be otherwise possible, within which operate expectations checked in everyday behavior, which one has always already entered into through the harmonization of complementary behavior within the system. Okay, I like that a lot. The problems with which one must actually involve oneself are thus determined by these expectations, their inconsistencies, their environmentally dependent variations, and their disappointments. The openness of the initial situation is transformed into a projection of structure and the risk of disappointment, both in relation to the environment and in relation to the system itself, though in different ways, so that within the system itself, system and environment must be distinguished. One can interpret the same state of affairs with the concept of conditioning from systems theory. System formation is impossible without any conditioning of connections, because only conditioning can delimit one domain of possibilities from another. But pure double contingency conditions only in a short-circuiting manner, namely by reference to alter, who in turn determines himself by referring back to ego. For such a system, everything would be possible, despite conditioning. Conditioning's function of delimiting ranges of possibility would not be fulfilled. This would be an example of a completely closed system, which is simultaneously completely open to any further conditioning that would help it constrain its possibilities. Thus, doubly contingent conditioning has only the function of increasing sensitivity to further conditioning. It creates sensitivity to chance and thereby sets evolution in motion. Without it, there would be no sociocultural evolution. One might object, as against the status naturalist argument of natural law theories, that there are no pure states of double contingency, nor historically have there ever been. Persons never meet without some assumption, without some expectations about each other, and they can experience contingency in the sense of always being otherwise possible only by means of behavioral types and expectations. But this objection only confirms that society is an autopoietic system which must presuppose itself in its own reproduction. What are experienced and reproduced as double contingency are the degrees of freedom necessary for continual reproduction on the basis of temporal elements, on the basis of temporal elemental events under constantly changing conditions. Finally, with the help of the concept of conditioning, the problem of reciprocity can be reinterpreted. Even in recent sociology, reciprocity is repeatedly used as a basic concept or viewed as the condition of sociality pure and simple. But this is only a matter of a certainly widespread special case of conditioning. The performance of one individual is made to depend on the performance of another under the condition of reciprocity. Thus, double contingency is reduced to double conditioning. This has many advantages. For example, rapid comprehensibility. But in the development of more complex societies, disadvantages have also emerged, and advantages can turn into disadvantages if the structure of society changes. Thus, reciprocity is to a great extent open to strata-specific evaluations of contributions. Performances coming from above count more than performances coming from below. This enables the adaptation of reciprocity to the requirements of stratified societies, but it becomes a factor of disturbance when function systems are differentiated. A general norm of reciprocity then becomes attenuated, and nevertheless will no longer apply to many determinations of action.
Section 10. We will return in more detail to the themes suggested here, to the concepts of structure and expectation in the chapter provided for them. For the time being, we are interested only in the fact that, and in how, double contingency is articulated and changed. The basis for this is finally that, within the horizon of such an experience of contingency, everything that takes place occurs as a selection and thereby operates to form structure when and insofar as other selections admit this structure. Thus, the analysis of double contingency leads back to the theme of selection, already introduced in both of the preceding chapters. A kind of compulsion to make selections became prominent when we clarified the concept of complexity and when we clarified the concept of meaning. Whenever more than a very few elements are to be bound together, and whenever something complex is experienced in the form of meaning, the necessity of making selections emerges, as does the real selectivity of anything that is actualized. Whether or not it is a conscious selection, a choice is made among the totality of possibilities for relationship or references to other things indicated in the meaning actually given. This is as far as one can go if one presupposes the standpoint of the individual, from which whatever is complex or meaningful is considered only from the viewpoint of variation. The analysis of double contingency goes further, taking up what suggested in the remarks about a general systems theory as a mutualistic or dialogical constitution. The question is now, what additionally, what more precisely, can one make out about selections and connections among selections if one assumes double contingency? The consequences for selection can be summarized under two considerations. First, connections among selections are built into individual selections, because every ego also functions as an alter for its alter ego, and they both take that into account. This in no way guarantees in advance consensus or even the possibility of harmonizing connections among selections. One can miscalculate projections, or deliberately enter into conflict or drift toward dissolution. But the consequences of working connections among selections into selections lie in something else, and that leads to our second consideration. Connections among selections can themselves be selected. Selection is doubly selective. It chooses one possibility among those presented for choice, and not others, and it chooses a domain of possibilities, a whence of selection, in which a specific number of alternatives with clear tendencies for specific options stands out. This double selectivity has come up for discussion before its appearance in systems theory. When an earlier author speaks of necessita cercata, sought after necessity, in relation to attendance at princely courts in general and to friendship in particular, this means that a sphere of contact is freely chosen, in which one exposes oneself to reciprocal adaptation and which one can leave only in its entirety, merely to find oneself in the same situation next time. This is life experience put into a formula, and precisely for this it is convincing. Carrying this over into a theoretical context opens wide-ranging possibilities for conceptual disposition. This is particularly true if theoretical questions are posed for decision on a sufficiently high level of abstraction. In theoretically binding systems theory to the theorem of double contingency, how one interprets the selection of selection domains is decisive. Initially, one is tempted to say that the domain of selection is a social system. One first chooses to affiliate with a system and then chooses actions within the system. But this interpretation would contradict the system-environment concept presented above, as well as the results of the phenomenological analysis of meaning. It would too severely reify what is assumed to be a system. This point of departure is not incorrect. However, we need only modify it. Selection domains are not isolated systems chosen out of the rest of the world, but reductive perspectives for a relationship between system and environment. Systems are selected, not as a bunch of objects, but as ordering perspectives from which a relationship between system and environment is accessible. They are chosen as a reduction of complexity, which always has to be assumed, and despite this can be selected, if selections are to be oriented. Selection domains cannot be chosen as systems without thereby selecting and sorting out environments. Such domains can and must be identified with respect to systems. To retain this theoretical standpoint, we would like in the future to speak of system references, emphasizing that systems are chosen as reductive perspectives for themselves and for their environments. We speak of a plurality of system references if the selective and combinative character of this orientation to system-centered reductions should be emphasized. This takes account of the fact that systems can be formed only in relation to a much more complex environment, and that meaningfully self-referential processes understand themselves as system internal in such a way that they refer their meaning to their environment, and that everything that is environment for them can be referenced back to them. That's referential totalities right there. To this extent, a self-steered selective process brought about by double contingency produces a concept of itself as being internal to a system, but this always refers to an orientation toward the environment as well. The environment is whatever at any time. The environment is whatever at any time cannot determine selection processes by actual double contingency, but perhaps can become a theme and motive for it. Wherever double contingency overdetermines selective accordations, the selection process rests on the difference between system and environment. This alone makes it possible to choose selection domains as specific reductions for a relationship between system and environment. One can select them only as a unity, as the unity of the difference between system and environment. And that is the end of chapter 3. There's a lot of notes. And that's it. How many notes are there? Like 47 or something? Or more than that?
I'm going to need you to read the notes.
53. Yeah, lots of notes.
I'm going to need you to read the notes, man. Just kidding. like really fast. Like Talcott Parsons and Edward Shills. Yeah.
Dude.
I do listen to them on the robot readers most of the time. Most of the time, because it's like I'm usually doing stuff with my hands, so I let them kind of just pass through. And I usually get something from it, but yeah, not when we're reading.
Yeah, I think the notes in this are definitely helpful because there's just a lot there.
Yeah, cybernetics, functionalism, and really there's a bunch of sociology stuff that I don't know about and that I have to find out about. Reading Reza Negrestani is also just made me go, I gotta look into functionalism more.
Yep.
But that's good. That's a good first start. I feel happy. I'm glad we finally got into some Luhmann.
Yeah,
it's been a long time coming. Like, I want to emphasize for people that we did a ton of stuff that was directly in my wheelhouse for like 6 months. And that only in the last couple of months had you started to bring in Luhmann and connect it to other things and show why it's relevant to the research interests we're already on before we got into this. So nobody gets any ideas like, oh, just because you're a tier 4 subscriber or because you're a fellow traveler or whatever, I'm gonna just read your books with you. Like, cause no, I fucking won't. No, I fucking won't. Yeah.
It definitely emerged out of, I mean, it came out of the CMT research that was like just more and more like, oh, there is some relevancy here. And there's some direct references even in some of the shit. So yeah, I mean, it's not like, oh, hey, this guy did a cool tweet. Read his book.
He also has a theory of media. Like he has his own theory of media based in social systems theory.
And that's why, again, because it's directly related to critical media theory, like, trying to think of a good example of a book that I like that, like all the shit that I talk about with who's that guy I was just talking about the other day? Josha Bach. And like, Stephen Wolfram, and like I like these guys a lot too, but I'm not like, Dave, you need to read these guys. Like let's spend a lot of fucking time going through this because like it's not relevant to what's already going on.
And you're also not in the forums or DMing people like all these sources and stuff. And I would say the people who keep coming and doing that with us have all weeded themselves out repeatedly over and over again. They come in, they oh, here, check out this. And it's like, dude, we're trying to build an intellectual milieu, not like a little like interpersonal, like I'm a friend and kind of I'm into some things. So you're going to tell me, oh, read this so we can talk about it. No, the point is like, course gated social media. So it's like, oh, you've got something that's related, well, do the prereqs, get that common basis with us. And the lecture we're going to check out tomorrow in the writing club will relate directly to that idea, right? Like you're never writing to a standardized audience. You're never writing to some like aggregate of humanity. Like you're writing to good writing is always writing to an actual audience, and you define your audience as you write. You help your audience know who they are as you write, and that way you can also help someone realize that they ain't the audience. Now they still might be. They might still be there for it, but like. You got to do it. Anyway, I think that was really great. I'm excited to get into this next thing with you. And so I want to close out in the next few minutes, but I want to give you some time to reflect on what we've done so far. And
I think I do think this is a good chapter. Like I think this is when stuff starts clicking. And taking a shortcut there, while it may make it a little less legible or even intelligible, I am happy we started here because it's a good chapter, and the book only picks up steam from here, and I'm excited to get through it. It's long, and I'm excited to get through it and then do more shit and then come back to it and actually do like a rigorous fucking exegetical reading of it. That's going to be shit. Doing that with Virilio and then doing that with this. I'm excited to, like it's going to be the shit.
Stiegler. Yeah, dude. Especially because we're running through these four and then we're coming back and spending a lot of time with McLuhan and Baudrillard. And we're already doing Capital Mondays. So by the time we reread Virilio, Ellul, and Stiegler, we will have read, done like a long form McLuhan, Baudrillard grind. And like that's, so it's like, we'll have done our first passes and then we'll come back to them through these guys and it's going to be sick.
Yeah.
At some point, someone's going to have to give you an honorary PhD. So the main goal at Theory Underground is not that you get some certificate or credential from me. It's that at some point, some PMC person feels so bad that you're so advanced and you don't have a degree that they fucking twist some provost or president's arm or whatever into getting you an honorary PhD that you can then reject.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Maybe you don't reject it because honestly, like that would be some serious, at that point it validates all the shit and everyone feels like, oh my God, wow, you were doing some real shit. You weren't doing fantasy football. You were doing something real. Whoa,
Yeah, dude. Yeah. I mean, eventually like, a goal is to write multiple books and to think of them as theses that I'm just like, yeah, I'm just writing this because I feel the need to get it out, not because I'm like engaged in some hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of academic bullshit, but it still is a thesis. Like it still is to be of like high caliber intellectual effort.
Exactly.
And then I still want to put my dick on the table and be like, what's up? Even though I know that's not what it's all about, I still want to do that someday.
Dude, I'm going to write in 10 years. I'm going to sit there and I will be working through thoughts, and it won't be like little eclectic thoughts. It will be like I am working through thought itself, and I am taking a meaning and I am working through that meaning in multiple languages. And I'm switching between registers as much as I need to. I'm bringing it to bear, like all of the resources, and it's going to be like impenetrable, absolutely impenetrable, but it will be fucking fire, and it will be condensed, and it will be powerful. And people will be like, oh, why do you write like that? It's like, because I've always wanted to be able to write like that, first of all. Second of all, I've more than paid my dues. I'll be able to say that because I'll have all these courses and I'll have all this introductory stuff. And it's like, look, there's no excuse. Like, don't read this book. Go read those ones. Those ones are for you. This is just like one of the products of a productive process that I've been fleshing out here for the last decade with Nance. That's what I'll say. And people will go, fuck you. And then they'll go get drunk and then they won't care. And the world will burn up and I'll die and be forgotten and it'll be okay.
But hey, man, it's the dance party at the end of time. And at least we're going out on our own terms.
At least on our way out, no one's going to fucking get to patronize us that far. You know, like no one's going to be able to be like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't have a degree. We'll be like, for the last 10 years, I've been doing these different languages every week. I've been doing these physical activities every week. And I've been reading these different authors repeatedly while engaging with contemporary and classical literature. So come at me again with what? Shut the fuck up. Yeah. At least, and then we get to enjoy our dance party because people will leave us alone.
There's going to be like 12 of us just like self-satisfied.
Yeah, dude. It'll be like having found enlightenment, but it's just because people leave us alone because they know they can't beat us. And people are like, they're fucking assholes. And we're like, we just hang out at the breakfast diner every morning for like 4 hours with our baseball caps, like old men. And we eat our scrambled eggs or whatever the fuck old people eat.
Yeah, dude.
And everyone will be like, they exist. And the PMC itself will be like, we have to do a revolution because every time we say that the workers have to do it for us, these motherfuckers write some more essays about us and it breaks our hearts, you know? That's my new position. My new position is that change is the PMC's responsibility. But they have to be radically responsible about how they go about it. And it's our job to hold them accountable. And by us, I mean the intellectual vanguard. The intellectual vanguard's job is not to make the change. It's to tell people that's not change. That's not real. What you're doing there's bullshit. That's blah, 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 blah. And they go, who the fuck are you? You'd be like, oh, here's my dick on the table. I work at Amazon. Now get back to your job, which is fucking stop, letting yourself off the hook by saying we as workers need to do all the organizing. No, motherfucker, you do.
Yeah.
I think honestly, awesome. I think Elton will be surprised by that position. That is not exactly the position that I was holding through the short course on the PMC, But it's especially how I feel after the tour. After Catrone, Tut, and Lane all had like this idea. I mean, I would say like as well as Lou and Miles. It's just like everybody has this idea. Oh, well, our job is just to tell the workers to organize. Shut the No, you do it. You're the one with the relative time energy. You're the one with the voice. You're the one with the supposed education. Not that you share it openly in lecture form with other people so that we could actually qualify it and figure that out or get on some kind of a even playing field with you at some point. Like we don't have entry into the field because you haven't made that accessible. But it's just like this idea of radical responsibility. I think it's going to be a slow detonating bomb. I mean, it's in the Timenergy book, but I think that slowly over time, people are going to be like, oh shit, I think it just destroys this anti-populist, not anti-populism, but anti-populist elitism that people use, or the pseudo form of populism where people are saying workers need to organize. It's pseudo. It's like, what workers? Not gig workers, not me, not like 25 of the jobs I've worked, not my parents, not anyone else's parents that I even fucking know. Like, yeah. But this is all rabbit trails and asides. I think we can close this out. Everybody, thank you so much for joining. It's been lovely doing this with you all. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
Fuck yeah.
Thinking is super uncool, and that's why you should do it. It's just like almost anything that's like cool anymore. It just sucks. And I think that's like what the underground movement has always been about, is just like seeing what's in the mainstream, being like, it ain't there, and kind of like cobbling something together, and yeah, it's a little mismatched, but that's like its beauty.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
We bring primary texts from leading lights of diverse fields to bear on topical issues and works popular in our current world. Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates of the attention economy.
Usually, a good edited collection has good essays, but you only want to read a few. Every essay makes me want to read the other essays because you have a vision. Everyone that you invited for a reason. You weren't some fake publicist who's like, how's so-and-so's a new book? Have them on your show. No, you only talk to people because you've read shit by them that you've thought about, that you think has value, even if you disagree. So I think that's what's amazing.
I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books, one, my book, Timenergy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of Underground Theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, you will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. Support at this stage of the operation is more crucial than ever because my savings were used up over the last year of getting this established. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels or a couple big time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. If you cannot afford it, but want to get involved with some of the stuff behind the paywall, I have made a financial aid scholarship you can sign up for here in the description. Quick side note, some people ask about the profit motive. At this point, I have not actually made a return on any of my investment in terms of the amount of time, energy that I put into things, the amount of savings I've actually put into things, the opportunity cost of the work that I'm doing as opposed to the other kinds of things that I could be doing for money. But more importantly, I don't actually make enough to pay for my cost of living. The goal is to make enough for my cost of living, and then once that is achieved, everything over that amount is going to go towards expanding the operation to the point where I can hire Michael Downs, aka Mikey of The Dangerous Maybe, to be a full-time researcher and part-time teacher at Theory Underground. All right, so with that aside, I just want to say also, if you are a worker with earbuds, what's up? I see you. I work at Amazon part-time, and everything I do is for my past self who used to work there full-time. Most workers with earbuds couldn't care less about theory, but I do believe a working class intellectual revolution could grow out of the underground theory scene. My hope is that what I have built here will contribute to making the scene something more than just a scene, and you into something more than just a scene kid. We're trying to make this into a real intellectual milieu capable of leading a way forward beyond the imminent crises facing humanity. But for that, we need thinking now more than ever.
Start thinking.
I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind!
I love you so much.
I love you too.